Okay, in lesson 12, we're going to learn how to prepare payroll records. And in the first section, we're going to learn how to calculate employee earnings. The first thing we need to do is figure out how employees are paid, and then we have to calculate hourly employee earnings. So for our purpose right now, what we're going to do is we're going to use hourly employee earnings, and we need to understand how employees are paid. First way that an employee is paid is what's called an hourly wage. An hourly wage is you're paid a certain amount of money for every hour that you work. The next way that you could receive pay is being a salaried worker. I'm a salaried worker. I get paid a fixed amount of money per year, and I get that money whether I work 40 hours or whether I work 60 hours. So it's a set amount of money. Another way you could get paid is based on commission. An employee is earned a commission when they sell something. Examples of companies that would issue a commission would be a real estate agent or a car salesman or anyone else that works on commission. Insurance agents receive a commission. There are several different professions that you could work on that receive a commission, and the more work you do, the more money you get in the form of that commission. Total wages would be the total amount that an employer would be paying to someone. This is our total earnings before any of our deductions are taken out, and we're going to learn how to calculate those deductions. Another way to refer to our total earnings is gross earnings, gross pay, or gross wages. So those terms are used interchangeably. So when we look at this time card, we can pay our employees a couple different ways. The first is this pay period. It's the number of days or weeks that you have in a specific pay period. And there are several different ways that you can be paid. You can be paid weekly, you could be paid bi-weekly, you could be paid semi-monthly, or you could be paid once a month. Those are the typical ways that people are paid. A total amount earned by all employees for a pay period is called a payroll. And that payroll is the total amount before any deductions have been taken out. As you'll see, what we have to do is we have to take our total earnings and then we have to deduct our federal, state, local, and other taxes so that we can send those taxes into the respective agencies. So we, as the employer, are responsible for taking these taxes out and paying the correct agency. So anyone that's paid is an hourly wage works 40 hours. That's a normal week. How do we calculate those regular hours? Well, we do so by looking at that employee's time card. The person that's preparing this payroll is called the payroll clerk. And one thing that you should know is that when an employee is a payroll clerk, they calculate how much payroll should be deducted from the employee's paycheck, and then they transfer that money into a payroll account. So money is not kept in the payroll account, it's transferred into the payroll account based on the total earnings and the total net pay that you calculate. That's done by a payroll clerk. So how are we going to calculate how much our employees make? One way is this thing called a time clock. It's important that you maintain accurate payroll records in order to prevent any problems that might arise in an employee's paycheck. So for most times, what was done for many, many years is you had this time card, you wrote your time, or you had it stamped by this machine, and then you went to the next line, and then you calculated based on this time clock. Now, bigger businesses are able to afford a more complex system of recording payroll. For our example, you need to know that if you work 40 hours a week, that's regular. Anything over 40 hours a week constitutes what's called overtime hours. You should also note that when you are calculating the hours worked, you can round up to the nearest quarter hour for an employee. So you have to read the directions carefully to see how they are rounding up for our problems. Why is this important? Well, when you figure out your number of hours, you have to have an accurate number of hours or else your entire payroll will be incorrect. So when calculating, you'll see when we arrive at 7:59, we round up to 8 o'clock. When you punch out at 12, you round down to 12. So you see you have 4 hours there, 4 hours there. Where it gets a little tricky is if you punch in before, here, 4:52, you punched out a little early, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt and we're going to give you the full 4 hours. Some employers are very strict and they tell you when you can punch in. You have to check with your employer on how they're handling that. So you calculate your regular hours, you calculate your overtime hours, and then you calculate your total hours. Your pay period is always going to be written on your time card. Now, this is a more complex system. So bigger companies can afford more complex systems to figure out employee start and end times. Usually, that's also done through the IT department because you have to log on to your computer by a certain time. So that may be done by your IT department. So for our problem here, what we're going to do is we're going to use this information that you see from the previous time card to figure out our overtime hours and our regular hours. So let's look. This is a pay period. This to me looks like it is a semi-monthly pay period because it's December 1st through the 15th, but not necessarily. So we're looking at our regular hours and our overtime hours, and then we have our total hours. We have that for our employee John Butler and Carrie Wells. So our job is to figure out total payroll because we have to calculate how much we have to transfer into the payroll account so that when the employees go to cash their checks, money's in the account for them when they cash their check. So to calculate your earnings, what you do need to know is that we have laws that are enacted by our federal government and some through our state government, but our federal government sets the minimum wage laws, and minimum wage when I was working was $3.35. So you can see it's gone up, and in some companies give a little bit more. They paid more during the pandemic, and you also need to know that overtime hours are calculated at time and a half, so that's 1.5 times your regular hourly wage. So to figure out your hourly earnings, you're going to take the employee's regular earnings, and you're going to take that 88 hours and multiply that by $15. So $88 times $15 is 8 times 15 is 1,320. So I can't write that there, but yes, I can. 1,320. Okay, now to figure out your overtime rate, you're going to take $15 and multiply that by 1.5. So your overtime rate is going to be $22. To figure out your overtime earnings, you're going to take the number of hours, which was 6.5 hours, and multiply that by your hourly overtime rate. So if you take 6.5 hours and multiply that by $22, then the amount, oopsies, is $22.50. Sorry, $22.50. Let me back that up and make sure. Let me go back. Let's go 15 times 1.5 is $22.50, and then multiply that by 6.5. So that's $146.25. That's $146.25. Good thing I caught that because that would have made our payroll completely off, which would have been a headache when the employees calculate. But if employees don't check their work, then you might get caught later. You might not get caught at all. But my point is you need to try and be accurate, so that's why you want to make sure that everything is correct. Now, to calculate your total earnings, you're going to take your regular earnings, that's $1,320, and you're going to add your overtime earnings, $146.25, and that gives you your total payroll, $1,466.25. That's how you calculate your total payroll. Now this 1466.25 is our total payroll. This does not include any of the deductions. So this is our gross pay, our gross earnings, our gross wages. However you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, that's what it's called. So let's go to our workbook problem. I'm not going to keep anything. I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to open up my chapter 14. And while I'm opening up my chapter 14 assignment, I'm going to ask you to turn in your textbook to page 350. On page 350, we have our work together and our on your own. So let's open up our chapter 12. Okay, pop that open, and then let's look at our directions. Our directions are the October 15 time card, and I'm going to save this first so I can do a file, save as. I like to save this on my desktop, so I put it in my folder so I have them on the desktop in our accounting Excel problem, and I call it Charles Answers for 12. Okay, so now we need to get to the beginning and go to our 12-1, work together and on your own. So let's just do this. Let's get a look at our problem. Okay, directions. Please follow along as I read the directions to you. The October 15 time card for Alice R. Webster and time card data for other employees are provided in the working papers. Your instructor will guide you through the following example. Round hours to the nearest quarter hour. Step 1, calculate the regular, overtime, and total hours worked by Ms. Webster. Any hours over 8 hours per day or 40 hours per week are considered overtime. Each work week begins on Monday. Record the total hours on the time card. Step 2, enter the regular and overtime hours for Ms. Webster in the schedule. For each employee, calculate the amount of regular, overtime, and total earnings. Overtime hours are paid at 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. Okay, so first we have to make sure we calculate her time card. So let's see what we have here in our workbook page. So here we have Alice Webster. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so I can see this. Okay, so we have Alice Webster's time card. And it looks like everything has been calculated for us. So we have 88 hours and 7.5 hours. How much is Alice Webster paid? Okay, so, okay, I'm going to have to stop for a minute because she gave you the answers. She did. Okay, Michelle, yeah, she gave you the answers, so hopefully you're going to see how we calculate this so that you can figure out how to do this without looking at the answers, so I'm hoping that you're going to be honest. Now, let's look at our hours. We have 8, let's see, they were in at 7.54, out at 11:57. So that's going to be 4 hours in the morning and then 4 hours in the afternoon. So that's going to be 8 hours, 8 regular hours. Next, you're going to look at the next one, 4 hours in the morning, 1:06. We're going to say 1 to 5. That's 4 hours in the afternoon. So that's going to be 8 hours. Next look, 8 to 12, 1 to 5, another 8 hours. Here on the next, we have some overtime hours and we have some regular hours. So from 8 to 12 and 1 to 5, that's 8 regular hours. Here's where we have some overtime hours. 6 p.m. to 9:30, that's going to be 3.5 hours, 3.5 hours. And then the next day is a Friday. It looks like we worked from 1 to 5 and then 6 to 10. So that's another 8 hours. It's just at a different time. 8:01, another 8 hours. And then 8 to 12, 8 to 12, 1 to 6, that's 8 regular hours and then 1 overtime hours because anything over 8 hours is overtime. And then we have, it's another 8 hours, 8 to 1, 8 to 104, and 2 to 5. Okay, that's another 8 hours. And then 8 to 1, 2 to 5, 8 to 1, 2 to 5 is another 8 hours. And then 10 to 1. 10 to 1 is going to be 3 overtime hours because I think we're at 40, aren't we? 10 to 12 is going to be I gotta tell you, I'm looking at the workbook and this, the 13th, should be 105. This should be 105. That should be 105. And then the amount of overtime hours is 3 hours overtime. I'm proofreading her work now. Okay, now we have another 8 to 12. 1 to 5 is 8 hours. Okay, so now we're going to see. I'm going to use this. I'm going to put a formula here. I need to get rid of her answers. So I'm going to put a formula here that adds up all of these cells, and I'm just going to select the range, and I'm just going to do an auto sum because ain't nobody got time to pay for that. Okay, so that's 8.5 hours, and then I'm going to do the same thing here, and then I'm just going to put an auto sum. Give me a home, give me an auto sum, and then enter, make sure that that's 7.5. Okay, so I have 88 regular hours and 7.5 overtime hours, and I can see that is correct. So now what we have to do is we have to now go to the second step. The second step tells us that we're going to enter the regular and overtime hours for Ms. Webster and the schedule for each employee. Okay. So based on our employee numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, we have 80, 80, 70, and 88. Okay, so we were supposed to fill that in. You're going to fill that 88 and that 7.5 in. So now we're going to enter a formula to calculate their regular hours. To enter a formula, press the equal sign. And you're going to take and multiply the regular hours times your regular rate of pay. So that's going to be the value in cell F27. So that's going to give you your regular hours. And I'm just going to fill down that formula since that's going to be our fill handle. So did you see how I did that? I grabbed my fill handle. Let's make sure you saw how I did that. After you enter the formula, you're going to press the enter key. In the lower right-hand corner, you have the fill handle. The fill handle is an amazing tool in Excel. It will fill down and copy the same formula. So if you look here, look up in my, my formula bar. It took D27 times F27. If you look in the cell below it, it took D28 times F28. So it fills down. Now to calculate your overtime hours, we need to take our overtime hours, we have to take our regular rate of pay, and we have to multiply that by 1.5. So I'm going to press equal sign 1.5, and I'm going to multiply that by $9 an hour. And then I'm going to multiply that by my overtime hours. Now, I didn't have to use parentheses, but you may have to, in your formula bar, use the order of operations as you have been instructed by your mathematics teacher. Now, I don't know if the fill handle is going to work, so we're just going to see it for the hell of it and see if it works. Oh my goodness gracious, did you see how that works? So if you understand the concept, then you can use Excel as a tool to calculate for you. So gone are the days of the calculator. So you just need to make sure you understand how I got that number. Remember, overtime rate You take your regular rate, multiply it by 1.5 because that's time and a half, and then multiply it by the number of hours that you worked overtime. Now, to calculate our total earnings, we need to add our regular wages to our overtime wages. So again, start your formula with an equal sign, and I like the point and click method. So I take my regular wages and I click the plus sign, and then I add my overtime hours to my regular wages, and then I get my total wages. Once you've figured that out, you can use your handy dandy fill handle, and you can fill down the total amount. Okay, so now your task is to complete 12-1 on your own. Now, before I release you, I'm going to double check and make sure that these numbers are correct so that mine are correct. If you have any questions, please email your teacher. Good luck.